we're digging into your sources today and focusing on something universal: conflict.
Right, but we're looking beyond just, avoiding fights or winning them.
Exactly. We're exploring how different cultures, past and present, have actually ritualized conflict, sometimes turning it into something, well, constructive.
It's pretty fascinating. We've got sources from anthropology, history, even some really cool modern projects.
Yeah, drumming out disagreements, or AI that's inspired by ancestral communication, really surprising stuff. So the mission for you listening, to maybe get a new perspective, see conflict not just as negative, but as potentially a path to connection, growth even.
Let's get into it. So where do we start seeing these alternative ways?
Well, one really vivid example comes from Nuthuka in Nigeria.
Ah, yes, the annual ritual Anisis and Obi, the older couple.
That's the one. They reenact an old argument under their udala tree for their grandkids.
Which sounds, maybe a bit awkward, reliving fights.
Right. But Nanika's explanation is key. She calls it fighting to feed the roots.
Like clearing old brush so new plants can grow, like a yam plant, she says.
Exactly. It suggests that maybe airing things out, even old stuff, can be healthier long-term than just smoothing things over constantly.
Yeah, it taps into a core Igbo idea, right? That disputes aren't just private messes.
No, they're seen as communal lessons, things everyone can learn from.
Elders get involved, using proverbs like, a child who does not cry dies on its mother's back, meaning you got to voice the problems.
Yeah. Anthropologist Nwando Achebe calls it democratizing discord, giving voice to tensions.
It's such a contrast to many Western models, which often focus so much on quick fixes, resolution now.
Totally. The Igbo approach seems more about the long game, the health of the community, the relationship, continuity.
And you see echoes elsewhere, like the Jalaid Masquerade in Benin.
Oh, right, where masked performers satirize local issues during festivals?
Yeah. A Yoruba elder, Adebayo Okonowo, apparently said, "The mask lets us speak truths too hot for bare faces."
So the ritual itself creates distance, safety, allows difficult things to be aired without direct confrontation, maybe.
Exactly. It's a mechanism. Both examples show this shared idea. Ritualized conflict as a tool for social cohesion, not just division.
Which makes you wonder, what about before colonialism really changed things globally? Were these kinds of structured approaches common?
Well, the sources point to some really interesting pre-colonial examples. All over the world, actually.
Like the Navajo has the peacemaking courts? That sounds amazing.
It really does. People co-narrating their issues until the stories kind of merged.
Elder J. Sosi said, "You speak until your throat is raw, because truth emerges from exhaustion." Wow, exhaustion leading to truth.
It suggests a process, doesn't it? Pushing past the surface arguments, deep listening, maybe.
Yeah. And pre-colonial Rwanda, the Gakaka courts under fig trees. Whole villages involved.
Focused on restoration, healing the community fabric.
Yeah.
Not just punishment.
And it wasn't just indigenous societies outside Europe. Think about medieval Europe's charivari.
The public shaming rituals, often targeting abusive husbands, kind of grassroots justice.
And Japan had the samurai kenkariseibai, equal blame for both parties in a fight.
Right, to discourage petty squabbles from escalating.
So across these different places, there seems to be this underlying belief that conflict, if handled through ritual, could actually purify things, rebalance them.
Precisely. A stark contrast to colonial systems that often came in focusing heavily on punishment, on winners and losers decided by law.
Like the Akan people in Ghana, their Impada ceremony for forgiveness.
Exchanging symbolic gifts, water to cool things down, an egg showing fragility.
That quote from historian Kwame Arshin is perfect.
Okay.
You cannot hold an egg and a stone at the same time.
It really captures that shift needed for reconciliation. These weren't just ideas, they were embodied practices, physical actions.
But then colonialism arrives, and the sources make it clear this really disrupted things.
Hugely. That 19th century view just dismissed these practices as primitive, uncivilized.
Yeah, like the British banning public disputes in Nigeria, and missionaries pushing for quiet households.
It wasn't just disapproval, it was active suppression. Like the Sex with Samesh Nation's Sevolch, their truth-telling stick being sidelined.
Or in India, the British legal system basically replacing the traditional village councils, the panchayats.
That quote from the Rajasthani farmer, Lakshman Singh, it's heartbreaking. Suddenly, our elders' voices meant nothing. A stranger in a robe decided our fates.
And that statistic, over 70% of land disputes in colonial India ending up in formal courts by 1900, you can see the trust shifting or eroding.
Definitely. And at the same time, Western thought itself was kind of evolving toward individualizing conflict.
Right, like Harriet Lerner's work noting how relationship advice often boiled down to communication failures between individuals.
Yeah, sometimes maybe overlooking the bigger social context. And Freudian ideas also framed conflict often as an individual internal issue.
So the overall result globally was this decline in what you might call communal conflict literacy.
I think so. Disagreement started to feel shameful, something private, maybe even pathological.
You mentioned the Kikuyu's Kiama councils in Kenya being banned, Wambui Otieno lamenting the loss of the language of dignified anger. Powerful.
It is. But, the story isn't over. What's really exciting now is seeing how communities are reviving old ways or inventing totally new rituals.
Oh, okay, tell me about that. Like the feminist fight clubs in Kerala.
Yeah, Sangit's work. It's not about physical fighting, obviously. It's about empowering domestic violence survivors.
How do they do it?
They blend traditional forms, like opana, a kind of Muslim women's debate song, with role-playing and drumming.
Drumming, how does that fit in?
It punctuates the discussion, sets a rhythm. The founder, Meera Krishnan, said, "We're not teaching women to be meek, we're teaching them to fight better."
Wow. And it works.
Apparently so. A UN women's study showed fewer physical altercations, much more collaborative decision-making.
And that story about Priya, the drum reminding her husband it's a dance, not a fight, that's really evocative.
It is. And similar ideas are popping up elsewhere, like Brazil's Roda de Conflito.
Drawing on capoeira.
And then the favelas.
Yeah.
Using movement to navigate disputes. The facilitator, Carlos Mendes, described it as spinning arguments into art. A kick becomes a question.
That's incredible. And then there's the tech side, the AI in Johannesburg.
Mendel.ml. Yeah, training AI on recordings of Ubuntu dialogues, traditional consensus-based discussions.
So the AI, tells people how to argue based on Ubuntu?
Kind of. It listens for what they call colonial speech patterns, more adversarial ways of talking, and suggests alternatives based on Yukabuya, returning to the circle.
The developer, Thandi Mbeki, said the algorithm isn't a mediator, it's an ancestor. That's quite a statement.
It is, and people using it reported feeling conflicts were less lonely. That's significant.
And it's happening in Japan, too. AI based on Heian-era court diaries.
Right, encouraging poetic indirectness, like Speak Like Murasaki Shikibu, aiming to reduce workplace hostility.
From ancient courtly manners to modern office emails. Amazing.
And still in Japan, but very different. The Kintsugi dialogues.
Ah, like the pottery repair with gold.
Exactly. Couples in conflict literally break ceramics, then mend them together with gold lacquer.
So the break, the argument, becomes part of the object's history and its beauty.
Yes. Artisan Hiroshi Tanaka said, "Damage can create beauty." It really reframes the whole experience.
It reminds me of the Tohono O'odham story baskets you mentioned, with intentional flaws.
Exactly. Elda Maria Garcia's quote, "The mistake reminds us that perfection is lifeless, embracing the imperfections."
And studies show this Kintsugi dialogue actually improves relationship satisfaction.
Significantly, according to one cultural psychology study, people feel less like opponents, more like
artists, as one participant said, collaborating on something new out of the conflict.
It's a powerful shift.
Okay.
But it's not all smooth sailing, this revival. There's pushback, challenges.
Right, like the Sagwa Mesh Nation's Select ceremony being turned into corporate conflict kits.
Yeah, that's a prime example of co-option. Elder Kelsalem Rivers called it bottling a thunderstorm, trivializing something sacred and powerful.
And accusations of backwardness for reviving traditional mediation, like Sula in Egypt.
Despite the fact, as Sinai mediator Ahmed Hassan pointed out, that their traditional ways might be more effective than overloaded urban courts.
And the AI in Japan facing criticism from traditionalists.
Yes, people like philosopher Kenji Nakamura arguing machines can't grasp that deep cultural sense of harmony.
So there's this real tension. Who controls these narratives? How do you revive something authentically without it being diluted or, exploited?
It's a tricky balance, but the potential is still there. The sources really suggest a future where we might draw on a much richer toolkit for conflict.
Like teaching debate techniques from Botswana's Gagatla in schools and seeing bullying go down?
That's what UNICEF reported. Or imagine rage festivals in Seoul, inspired by Benin, giving a structured outlet for frustrations.
Or AI helping recover lost indigenous words for specific kinds of conflict resolution.
Could be. Or Oaxaca's Guelaguetza Festival, incorporating argument parades to perform social tensions.
Even Finland's fight schools, using Sami Yoik singing to teach kids how to argue differently.
It all points towards acknowledging conflict is inevitable, but how we engage with it? Well, there are many paths, many better rituals maybe.
So wrapping this up, the big takeaway seems to be this incredible variety. Cultures have found so many ways to handle conflict beyond just fighting or fleeing.
Yeah, it's not just about winning or losing, it's about connection, community health, learning, using conflict productively almost.
These ancestral blueprints offer so many ideas for approaching disagreements more wisely, maybe more creatively.
Which really brings it back to you listening. How do you tend to approach conflict? Is it always about immediate resolution, or could some of these other ideas resonate?
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. When that next argument flares up, will you just react, let it shrink things?
Or could you pause and maybe wonder, is there another way? Could you draw on some of this deeper wisdom, even metaphorically, to aim for something more connecting, maybe even more beautiful?
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.